Up to this point in our discussion on dienes, we discussed one type of a diene known as 1,2-diene or allene. So 1,2-dienes are molecules that contain two pi bonds, two double bonds that are connected to a single carbon. And such a molecule is interesting because such molecules do not have cis-trans isomers because the hydrogen atoms are found in different planes. So basically the two pi bonds that are found connected to the same exact carbon twist or rotate the pi bonds at a 90-degree angle with respect to one another, and that's why the pi bonds, or that's why the H atoms, are found perpendicularly in different planes with respect to one another. Now, a second type of category of dienes that we're going to discuss in this lecture is the 1,3-diene. 1,3-dienes are interesting because they form conjugated bonds. They have conjugation, which forms a conjugated system. Now, what exactly is a conjugated system? Why does a conjugated system actually form, and what does it look like? So before examining a molecule that contains conjugation, let's take a look at a molecule that does not. So 1,5-hexadiene. So the hexa simply means we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 carbons. The diene means we have two pi bonds, one at the 1 position and the second one at the 5th position. So one pi bond is between the first and second carbon, and the second pi bond is between the 5th and 6th carbon. Now, in such a molecule, notice that these two pi bonds are found a distance of 1, 2, 3 sigma bonds apart. And this distance is a relatively great distance. So because these two pi bonds are found so far apart, they will not interact with one another in any interesting way. So basically, if we examine the orbital diagram for this molecule, we get the following diagram. So we have the two p orbitals of the first and second carbon interact with one another, forming our pi bond shown by this orange dashed line, and between the 5th and 6th carbon we have the two p orbitals interact to form the second pi bond. And because these two methyl groups separate these two pi bonds, they will not interact with one another, and such a system in which the pi bonds are found far away is known as an unconjugated system. That is, there is no conjugation. Now, let's take a look at this molecule, 1,3-hexadiene, that does in fact have conjugation. So in this molecule, we still have our 6 carbon atoms, but now our two pi bonds are separated by a single sigma bond. So we have a pi bond between the 1, 2 carbon and between the 3, 4 carbon, and they are separated by this single sigma bond. So in this molecule, the two double bonds are separated by one sigma bond, and due to the fact that these two pi bonds are found in close proximity to one another, we have conjugation taking place, and conjugation will form a conjugated system. So this is said to be a conjugated system. Now, conjugated bonds are stabilizing because they form many more resonant forms. To see exactly what we mean, let's take this molecule, so 1,3-hexadiene, and let's label it as molecule 1. So basically, we can rearrange the following electrons in the following 4 major ways. So if these two electrons go to this bond, they will displace this bond, leaving our two electrons, placing our two electrons onto this carbon. We form the following resonance form. Now, if, on the other hand, this goes onto this and forms a pi bond here, displacing these two electrons, we get the following structure 4. And finally, if one of these electrons goes here, one of these electrons goes here, and these two electrons combine to form a bond, we get the following diagram. So notice that in the following resonant forms, 3 of these 4 forms, so form number 2, number 3, and number 4 all have a bond between the 2 and the 3rd carbon, between the 2nd and the 3rd carbon. So basically that means in this conjugated system, in the 1,3-hexadiene, not only will we have a double bond character between the 1, 2, and 3, 4 carbons, but also we're going to have a pi bond character between the 2nd and 3rd carbon. And notice this cannot be formed in the 1,5-hexadiene case because these two pi bonds are very far away. So once again, notice that in the 3 of these 4 resonant forms, there is a double bond between the 2nd and 3rd carbon, which does not exist for the 1,5-hexadiene case. So basically, that means that although structure 1 is the most stable, the lower in energy, and the structure that basically contributes most to the actual structure of 1,3-hexadiene, we also have these 3 other resonant form structures that also play a role in stabilizing our molecule, our 1,3-hexadiene. Now, the question still remains, why exactly is this a stabilizing effect? Why are conjugated bonds more stabilizing than unconjugated bonds? To see exactly what we mean and why our conjugated systems are stable, let's take a look at our 3-dimensional orbital diagram for 1,3-hexadiene. So basically we have a 2p orbital here and a 2p orbital here that form the first pi bond between the 1st and 2nd carbon. We also have the pi bond between the 3rd and 4th carbon between these two pure p orbitals. And notice that because these two orbitals are close enough to actually overlap their electron densities, there will also be an overlap and a bonding between the 2nd and 3rd carbon. So we see that our electron density will basically be distributed over this entire region instead of only these two regions. And whenever our electron density is distributed over a larger area, that is a stabilizing effect. This comes from quantum mechanics. So, for a conjugated system like the one shown here, the pi bond is able to stretch over a longer distance. This means that the electron density is distributed over a larger area, and this, of course, is a stabilizing effect, and this comes from the field of quantum mechanics. Whenever the electron density is distributed over a larger area, that is a stabilizing effect. So what exactly can we conclude about our discussion on 1,3-dienes and conjugated systems? So basically, when pi bonds are found a single sigma bond apart, as in this case, so we have a single sigma bond apart between these pi bonds, they can form a conjugated bond that basically stretches over this entire region here. This process is known as conjugation. Conjugation is the process of spreading out our electron density between this entire region here. Remember, these orbitals represent electron densities, probabilities of electrons being found within these shaded green and blue regions. Now, conjugated systems can distribute the electron density over a greater area, thereby stabilizing the actual molecule. And as we'll see in a future lecture, conjugated systems react differently than unconjugated systems. So 1,5-hexadiene will basically react in a very similar way to regular alkenes, but the 1,3-hexadiene will not react in a similar way to our alkene. They will react in a special way that we're going to discuss in a future lecture.